mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic. Yeah. All I need is one mic.
Hey everybody, welcome back to One Mic, where I watch shit so you don't have to. And today I'm here to talk about Season 2, Episode 3 of HBO's The White Lotus, entitled Bull Elephants. And the title refers to a conversation that Daphne and Harper have that I'm going to want to actually talk about and get a little bit more in-depth with in a little bit, but I'm going to save that for a little bit later. We'll talk about the episode title and that conversation when I get to the section where I talk about the couples, but I want to start by talking about the Grassos. You know, last week I laid out that I was going to kind of break down these episodes by the character plot lines. So I'm going to start with the Grassos, which is Bert, Dom, and Albie. We see this week, we learned this week that Dom is trying to get past this sex addiction and save his marriage. You know, last week he seemed hesitant to engage in anything with Lucia, but then the threesome presented itself, and understandably, he put the sex addiction remedy on the back burner. But then we did find out this week that the threesome actually didn't pop off, but it's because Mia fell asleep before it could actually get popping. But Dom ends up telling Lucia that after that night that he can't really mess with her for the rest of the week. He wants to work on this addiction. He wants to work on himself. And he's pretty much done with them for the rest of the week. And seeing as how they have keys to not one, but two of his rooms, I anticipate that's probably not going to be the last interaction that the Grassos have with Lucia and or Mia, but we'll see how that turns out. But Bert does see the girls leaving, and he, in Bert fashion, gives Dom shit about this continuously throughout the episode. And we also see that Albie is trying to win over Portia by being more aggressive. She mentioned this, and we see a couple examples of this in the episode where he's being a little pushier with physical affection. He's trying to play this game where he's making himself into the person that he thinks Portia wants him to be. But his nice guy nature seems to already have him like firmly entrenched in the friend zone. And Portia seems way more into this guy that's at the pool at the end of the episode than she is into Albie. But I think the best example of Albie kind of like altering his behavior, well, I don't want to say altering his behavior because I don't know who he was before he got here, but I think he's very clearly trying to win Portia's affections when he gets all super woke about The Godfather. And he's like, he essentially is tying it into this fragile masculinity where it's like, oh, we only really like, men only like The Godfather because of insert any fragile masculinity tweet that you've seen on Twitter over the course of the past couple of years. It's really just this regurgitating of popular feminist not even popular feminist ideas, but what Albie perceives to be what would be a feminist idea. Because I really don't think people hold this opinion on The Godfather. I mean, they might. I don't know. But I still think this is an example of Albie trying to win Portia over. And like I said, it's clearly not working. She's clearly more into this guy at the pool. And I think we'll see how that plays out over the course of the rest of the season. Which, by the way, I believe is 7 episodes, which means we only have 4 left. Bert also has an interesting line around this time as well. And he says, with this time being the Godfather conversation. And he says that people used to respect the old, and now that old people are just offensive reminders of an offensive past that they want to forget. And I think to a certain degree that's true, but I think it's also a lazy way of not taking any responsibility for any of the shitty things that you did in the past or that your generation did in the past. Because, like, yes, people are overly woke and wanting to attack anyone who says anything that could even be perceived as a little bit of a grievance. Like, it's like you take the tiniest thing and let's enter the woke competition and see how pissed off we can get over the tiniest little shittiest thing. But also, and this doesn't apply just to Bert's generation, this applies to people in general, but Bert's generation did a lot of really shitty stuff when they were younger. And they don't want to take any responsibility. They just want to blame it on people being too woke. And it's like, I wonder if this is a characteristic, well, it's clearly a characteristic of Bert, but I'm wondering if this is also, if this ties into Mike White's worldview as well. This idea that like you see, it's very prevalent among the generation ahead of me. Like, they're just very much like, everybody's too woke nowadays, because they look at everything that happened in their time as being the right way to do things. So when they see people doing things differently now, they look at it as lesser than. And that's how every generation looks at everything. Like, I'm sure the generation before them looked at them like, what the fuck are they doing? They're looking at my generation like, what the fuck are you doing? I'm looking at the generation after me like, what the fuck are you doing? And everybody just kind of has this, the way that I was raised is the right way, and now the next generation who's doing it differently is doing it the wrong way or an inferior way. And this idea of, they used to respect us and now we just remind them of offensive shit from the past. It's like, yes, you do. And yes, that is, I think, a flaw in this current generation, the generation after me, like the people who are probably hitting, close to hitting 30, somewhere around that age range, late 20s. Like those people who are just like looking for anything offensive to grasp at. I think that's true that people are doing that, but this is also Bert and his generation's way of deflecting from any responsibility, because they just look at it like that's just the way things were back then. And it's like, that doesn't mean that was okay. Because like, I'm sure we don't have to go back very long before that's just the way things were is real fucking shitty. So like, I don't like that way of like passing, that deflecting of responsibility, like, me being shitty ass Bert isn't the problem. It's overly sensitive and overly woke people who are the problem, that don't respect old people like they used to. And I do think that fits in with the Bert character, but I do have a little bit of curiosity if this is what Mike White believes, or is this what he wrote for this character. And we end the episode with Portia seemingly being past Albie. Like I said, she's interested in the pool guy, and Dom seeing potential sex in every woman that is in this bar. He is struggling to get past this sex addiction. Moving on to the couples, Cam and Daphne, and then Ethan and Harper. Their storyline this week is sparked by Harper's commitment to proving that she can actually be nice if she wants to try it. And she lays it on thick at this breakfast. But she fails to seduce Ethan after this morning jog. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute, because I want to talk about Harper and Ethan in a little bit, because I'm about to just start talking about it. So let me officially hold on that sentence, and I'll talk about it in a moment. But Harper's ability or desire to pretend to be nice is really put to the test when the idea is presented of her and Daphne spending the day together. And Ethan and Cam really push it, particularly Ethan, because he's fucking with her because he knows that this is all just an act. So he's like, okay, well, how far is she willing to go with this act? And they're exchanging glances. It's kind of a funny scene. And she's essentially forced into agreeing to spend the day with Daphne, because if she doesn't, this whole ruse, this charade that she's doing, where she's pretending to be cool with them, would be exposed. So she has to kind of pretend. And Daphne they end up at this mansion, and Daphne rents it out. And her and Harper have some pretty interesting conversations over a nice meal of edibles. And we learn that Daphne isn't necessarily a victim of Cam and his fuckery, but that she has her own agency, and she does stuff just to fuck with him. Like, and she does her own thing as well. And she says that she didn't tell him about renting the place and staying overnight on purpose, like just to kind of fuck with him. It seems practically like giddy to tell him about it. And she like tells him, but she doesn't give him a chance to speak. She cuts him off every time he's about to protest. And then she hangs up on him. And you can tell it very much is I'm doing my own thing. He's going to be doing his own thing. So I don't really feel any kind of guilt about it. And I'm just going to fuck with him because I can. And, but then as soon as the call is over, like he's displeased with this over the phone. You can tell he's not happy that she's not coming back. And I wonder if, again, he's wondering if she's, I'm going to kind of like tease the Cam Ethan portion a little bit. I wonder if he looks at her and wonders if she has the same worldview about everybody cheats and everybody lies that Cam has. I wonder if he has that same perception of her, and he's wondering, she's lying, she's cheating. So her calling and being like, we're not coming back, for him is kind of like, okay, well, I don't trust her because I don't know if she's on the same kind of shit that I'm on. Because as soon as he hangs up the phone, he turns to Ethan. It's like, well, they ain't coming back, so let's turn the fuck up. Let's get some Molly and let's go after it. So Lots of interesting things to question about all four of them after this episode. There's another interesting scene where I believe Harper imagines a bunch of guys being really creepy and aggressive, at least with their body language, like looking at her. It was a very kind of like, almost like the direction was, everyone look as if you're like 5 seconds away from raping this girl. Like that's the energy I want out of every man on this set right now. And they went for it because like those guys look like they were really fucking creepy. But then as soon as Daphne reemerges, everything kind of goes back to normal. There's no women in this scene still, but everyone just kind of seems like they're moving and not really paying attention instead of being honed in on Harper. And I can't help but wonder if for Harper, there's a level of excitement that maybe even borders on like a desire for like some level of danger or risk that's missing from her sex life that she yearns for. Because she seems to kind of be into like, when Cam was changing in front of her, it's like, the person I'm portraying here on this vacation is disgusted by this and is like, oh, this is totally like almost like sexual assault. But like deep down, the person that yearns for a more exciting sex life is kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe this thing that's like out of a porno movie is happening to me right now. And she seemed kind of into it when he like grabbed her ankle underwater and stuff like that. And now she imagines this situation where all these guys are looking at her like this. And it just makes me wonder about Harper's perception of her and Ethan's sex life. And I think this is a good time to talk about this as well, to go into a couple of points I wanted to make about Daphne and her worldview, and then about Harper and Ethan's sex life. So I'm going to start with actually now talking about the episode title, Bull Elephant. Daphne and Harper discuss whether or not they like being women, and Daphne essentially says that she does because she thinks that men are lonely and they can't make friends. She says something like they think they're doing important stuff, but they're just lonely. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But she talks about how elephants grow up in these pods, and when the boys get older, they're kind of like kicked out of the pods and forced to like wander the earth alone. And whenever we're seeing like elephants like splashing around in water, it's the women and the kids. And she thinks that that's like a sad life for these male elephants. And I don't know if that's true, if that's really what happens, if that happens in elephant culture, I don't know. But she, like I said, she concludes this by saying that men think they're doing something important and when really they're just alone. And again, I kind of can't help but wonder if this is the worldview that Daphne holds, and that Mike White wrote this for this Daphne character and is like, I need Daphne to have this perception, or if that's Mike White's perception and he wonders if, and he believes that we being men are largely alone, because I don't find that to be like even kind of like this close to true. So like I don't know. I don't know if that's meant to be a profound point from his perspective as the writer, or if that's meant to be like, look how clueless Daphne is. Because it came off to me as look how clueless Daphne is. Because if you think about it, like when you engage with other people in your day-to-day life, what perceptions and what experiences do you have as it pertains to camaraderie between people of the same gender? It's always been like women can't make friends because they're too catty toward one another. They're too petty. They're too vindictive. They're always competing with one another. Women can't make friends with each other because it's always some sort of competition or something like that. Whereas they get mad at men because we make friends so easily over stupid shit like sports and video games. So it's like the perception and in my observable reality has always been women are the ones who can't make friends and men are the ones who can. So it's like, what the fuck is Daphne talking about? And does she just have this skewed perception where she creates this almost like pity for Cameron for, I don't know, for whatever reason. I don't know why, but I don't know. Maybe that statement will turn into something that's, I think, maybe more applicable for people who are to situations for like wealthy people. Like maybe that's something in that community that's a little bit more true than it is in the in the normal people community. But I do find it interesting that Mike White would write something like that in a very overt way that maybe applies to him, more to him in these circumstances than it does to everyone. But like I said, again, that could be more of a statement on Daphne's worldview than his. It would just be a matter of how do we now take this flawed worldview that Daphne has, how is this going to now impact her actions and how she not even necessarily reacts, but just how she interacts with Cameron, and then how she might react to particularly finding out that he didn't have no problem making friends that night. Even funnier, right after she tells this story about the bull elephants, it cuts to like Cameron and Ethan having a great time on jet skis. I'm like, okay, like this is another reason why I do think it's less about Mike White's worldview and more about Daphne's worldview, because you don't write that, believe it, and then immediately undermine it in the very next scene. But like I said, the next scene, they're on jet skis having a great time. I'm like, yeah, how difficult it is for men to have fun with each other. But meanwhile, we essentially get confirmation that Cam invited Ethan and Harper on this trip just to try to, I guess, get his hand in the bag of Ethan's newfound wealth. After Cameron goes, hey man, I'm really upset that you didn't dabble in a little bit of insider trading with me. Like, what the fuck? And Ethan's like, that's totally illegal. It's like, yeah, but I wouldn't have told anybody. Like, after he gets into that, Cam kind of manipulates his way into at least invest in my firm, bro. Like, since you shafted me on the insider trading, like, at least I'll settle for, you'll throw some money toward my firm. So it's good. I'll forgive you for it. And like the manipulation here is pretty impressive. Also in this episode, when Cameron brings up everyone cheating and talks down monogamy, Ethan seems in disbelief, but then intrigued. And then while they're high on Molly and they're, having whatever time they're having with Lucia and Mia, Ethan makes out with Mia, but then kind of like turns down the sex. I wouldn't even call it makes out. Like, it's like they kiss and then he's just like, he shuts it down. But then we see him like savagely watching Cam and Lucia have sex. Like, okay, so there's like a weird moment where he's like we find out it's the bathroom. I feel like we couldn't tell at the time. And there's like banging on the door and he lets them in and the party kind of continues in there. And he just seems completely out of it. And then I'm looking at him, like the way he's looking at Cameron and Lucia, and it's making me now wonder if Ethan might be gay or at least grappling with feelings of attraction he might have toward Cameron. Because if you think about it, okay, he turns down, he talks about it, he gets awkward anytime their sex life is brought up, which is not a red flag. I mean, that's not something that everyone is going to be comfortable talking about over dinner. But he gets a little awkward anytime his sex life is brought up. He mentions like, oh yeah, we don't do it because she doesn't like having morning sex. And then she pops up ready for morning sex. He's like, still, I'm going to take a hard pass. And then him being intrigued by having this conversation with Cameron about monogamy and lying to your partner and cheating and all this kind of stuff. He seemed very intrigued in having this conversation about sex with Cameron, but not when the women were around. And I'm just wondering if Ethan is struggling maybe with his own sexuality, and Harper as well. Like, is Harper now kind of wondering about herself too? Like, what am I turned on by? What intrigues me? Is Ethan too kind of like, well, I mean, let's working under the assumption, let's just say Ethan is more interested in men than he is in women. Now you put him into this relationship with Harper, who is trying to portray herself a certain way as a sophisticated and dignified person, but in reality, she wants maybe something similar to what Portia was saying, to be like thrown around a hotel room or something like that. And she wants something that's a sex life that's a little bit more risque. And then you enter into a relationship with a guy who's not even really sure about his own sexuality maybe, or he's someone who is making excuses or whatever the case may be. And it's oil and water. So I'm wondering what's going to happen with those two. I do think we learned a little bit more about their sex life, at least conversation points about their sex life. We may not know more, but at least I think there's a little bit more to discuss and entertain. And then lastly, I want to talk about Tanya, Greg, and Portia. I've already talked about Portia a little bit, but Tanya and Greg fight over Tanya, essentially saying that Greg used her for her money and her doctors to get healthy. And then once he found out he had a few more years, he wasn't interested in spending them with her anymore. And she's crying and being really, really extra at this table. And the Jennifer Coolidge character is there's a thing after the episode where they're like, who would you want to go on vacation the most with? And Imperioli and F. Murray Abraham both say they would want to go on vacation with Tanya. My answer is like Tanya would be last. Like I would not want to be anywhere with Tanya. Like she is way too emotional, way too extra, way too needy and clingy. Like everything about Tanya is just grates on my emotions and personality. I couldn't do it. But she does end up doing a little flirty eyes with a different guy. So I wonder where that's gonna how that's gonna come into play now that Greg is gone. Greg might be now spending time with his other family. And now what is Tanya gonna do with this guy? And how is that gonna come into play when I think Greg said he's coming back in 2 days. When Greg comes back, what situation is Tanya gonna have with this new guy? So interesting to see what happens there. And then lastly, I want to close with 2 thoughts. One, what's up with Valentina? We see Valentina, and every time we've seen Valentina so far this season, she's just being shitty to people. And we see her again in this episode being shitty to people. And then one of the workers' names, Isabella, comes up and basically is like, I really admire everything you do and your hard work. And Valentina seems very appreciative of this. And I'm wondering if Valentina is someone who is resentful because she feels like she has to do everything to hold this staff together and to make this hotel or resort run well. And she's like, I have to do it all on my own. I have to be the one who cracks the whip on everybody, because if I don't, they're all going to fuck off, and our residents or our guests are going to have the experience they should be having. And then for someone to come along and be like, I appreciate what you've done. If she's just like, oh, wow, somebody appreciates all of the whip cracking that I do. But then I also look at how everything, like the more I think about it, everything in this season, not everything, but mostly everything this season revolves around sex and sexual relationships. And it makes me wonder if, because my next thought after what I said about Valentina is, what does that mean for this character on this show? Like if we establish that, oh wow, she's really happy that someone appreciates her hard work. Okay, cool. How does that tie into the rest of the show? And I'm wondering if maybe there is a sexual component here. Like if Valentina maybe has a thing for women, and it's kind of maybe the opposite of what's happening with Ethan. Like she's kind of bearing that, but in this moment when Isabella's like, hey, I appreciate what you do, she's kind of like, hey, wait a minute. And maybe she'll have some sort of sexual awakening as well. And I don't really have too much to go on there. I do think I lean toward it being a professional thing, but just with the kind of tone that the show has had as far as, sex kind of being a motivating factor in almost everybody's actions on this show. The only one that seems to not be motivated by sex is Tanya. Pretty much everyone else seems to be. What else could that mean? Other than she's going to find some sort of awakening and have some, find out that she has some affection for Isabella, maybe. Guessing. And then lastly, what happened to this murder mystery? Have you guys even thought about that? Like the opening scene with the whole thing, like several guests died. Because I remember in season 1, I thought that was going to be like the purpose of the show, right? Who is this that died and what happened? And the whole rest of the show is going to be us building up to that. When in reality, it ended up being a thing where it really was just a character study. And the murder was kind of just like, ended up being kind of almost like an afterthought for the most part. And it's kind of like, oh yeah, here's the guy that's going to get killed. And now I'm wondering about here, now that I'm approaching the show differently and I'm looking at it from a perspective of a character study, I'm finding myself completely forgetting to even think about this murder mystery and who could end up being killed. Why is it multiple people? Who did it? All of that. I'll probably say predictions, just because I've been going for 24 minutes. I've thought about it a little bit, but I'll probably say predictions for the murder mystery for next week, and we'll talk about that then. So until then, peace.